You know, Eve, there's usually a pretty easy way to get rid of trolls. I don't know what it is, but I've been in many other meetings where we've had these pornographic people coming in. Maybe we should consult. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Laura, I would say definitely, give Eve, get him in touch with whoever from Kofi and whatever that can that can do this, because this is not the first time we've actually had something like this. I remember with the Rwanda when we had I'm blanking out on her name, but it was a journalist about Rwanda who and we had this level of nonsense. Actually, I'll get Eve in touch with Greta of World Beyond War, because we even had stuff like this.
You had it when you moderate. Lovely.
That we did.
Usually the ones who really do it are the Miami Cubans. They seem to love spending around pornographic stuff.
Funny. I thought that they came from Christian conservative backgrounds.
Yes, exactly. I think there's an easy way to do it, because in other meetings they've managed to get rid of them pretty quickly. So we just need to consult with a technical person.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know how what happened there exactly, and unfortunately, I couldn't figure out how to get rid of someone.
Well, I think they used the wrong name. It all looked like it was coming from Dave Lowe, but I'm looking at Dave Lowe right now, and I don't think you did it, did you, Dave? But they managed to take your name.
Yeah, it's a whole, clearly, I guess somebody who has a little bit of skill. Anyways, hopefully this doesn't happen again. If it does, I guess maybe I'll end it and then try to figure it out for next time.
No, it was not I, Eve.
It
was not I.
Yeah, that's fine.
But interestingly, the choice of what they showed is very telling as well.
Yes, right.
In and of itself.
Very.
Eve, Laura will get you in touch with some code-ping people. I'll get you in touch with Greta of World Beyond War, and hopefully they can help you how to avoid
we'll figure that out. Yeah. So anyway, sorry about that. I don't know where. Yeah, I think it ended off with the IHRA, and so Canadian Heritage is going to demand grants. People sign the IHRA. In my opinion, quite an important development in Canadian foreign policy, pretty shocking. Maybe shocking is too strong, but Justin Trudeau announced that he's going to go to the Caricom meeting taking place on Wednesday and Thursday, and basically to try to press Caricom to join a foreign intervention into Haiti. And what is, I think, striking about this is that, one, they're continuing and pushing this intervention in Haiti. And now that we're talking about 5-6 months where Canada's been right at the middle of this, they, of course, a couple of days ago sent a spy aircraft, Canadian military spy aircraft, to hover over Port-au-Prince. So they're pushing this hard. Trudeau had a phone call with the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, and what's I think kind of fascinating about all this is that this is exerting pressure. This is using Canada's historic kind of imperial influence with the former British Caribbean colonies to press them to do something in Haiti that the Canadian government has waffled on. And it brings together the sort of intensity of their commitment to dominating Haiti with their perception, U.S. perception, that there are influential players in Haiti or with the Caribbean community, and that has a more than century-old history of Canadian banks dominating in the region. It goes all the way back to the slave plantation economies when cod from the Nova Scotia and Newfoundland was sent down to the slave plantation economies to keep people working 16 hours a day. And Scotiabank and CIBC's their wealth actually comes out of that trade, and So this incredible historical influence, it's generally kind of overlooked. Canada still represents the Caribbean countries at the IMF. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which the Canadian government is and has been influential. And to see Trudeau to make this decision to go down to the Caricom conference for the Haiti file is I think quite striking. And we'll see, what's the objective of the Haiti mission. Apparently, the story goes with the spy plane is that they spent 2 days on top of Port-au-Prince, or I guess cross Haiti potentially, but probably mostly on Port-au-Prince, spying for intel on gangs. And what that how that will be used is, how much of it's really about gangs. And the whole spy plane, I think in large part is a public relations exercise. It's part of showing Canadian commitment, I think in part to induce, partly to show Washington that we're serious, but also partly about pressing the Caribbean countries and other countries in the hemisphere that Canada is serious. And please send your police, please send your troops. And Jamaica made an announcement a couple of days ago that they would be open to doing so. Canada's ambassador to Haiti, I found out a couple of days ago, blocked me on Twitter, which I thought was kind of peculiar, kind of a little bit interesting. I mean, I've been criticizing him for months, not in any derogatory way, but just in a political way. And I think it's quite a bad sign, in fact, that he feels comfortable doing that. Ezra Levant apparently has a lawsuit against Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, on the grounds that Guilbeault blocked him on Twitter. And I'm sure what Levant did was actually, quite rude and inappropriate, and Guilbeault may have had at some level of justification in blocking Levant. But I think for ambassadors or government representatives to block journalists that cover subjects that they're, this is a form of relaying information to the public and specifically to journalists. And apparently Levant's actually brought a lawsuit against Guilbeault. And I think that it's actually quite dubious that Sébastien Carrière would actually go to the extent of blocking me I've never said anything rude, as far as I know, ever said anything rude to him, criticized him many times. I was trying to figure out what may have prompted him to do that. The only thing I can think of is that disrupting Bob Rae, where I focused on Haiti, may have prompted him to do that, which I'm not sure, but that's the only thing I could think of, because there's nothing else really on that, nothing specific that's happened recently besides that I could think of. On Friday, Dimitri Lascaris and some other activists here in Montreal interrupted Harjit Sajjan, the former defense minister, now Canadian International Development Minister, speaking at the Canadian Council or Montreal Council on Foreign Relations. And Dimitri, he questioned after Sajjan said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal, which it is, of course. He pointed out that U.S. invasion of Iraq was also illegal, and there was no response from the Canadian government, no effort to hold the U.S. accountable for its violation of international law. That was people can check out that disruption on my Twitter and on Dimitri's Twitter and some other places. Dimitri published an article on Canada Files titled, "In Canada's Parliament, Voices of Peace Have Been Silenced." And it basically talks about how Elizabeth May has abandoned its opposition to lethal aid to Ukraine. So right at I think on February 24th or right after Russia's invasion, she made a statement where she said in the House of Commons that she couldn't back sending weapons to Ukraine. But subsequently, very much emulating the Green Party in Germany, which is considered a success, I guess, in the Green movement, and the hawks, the Green Party in Germany have become real hawks. The foreign minister in Germany is a Green Party official. She's basically got on board with sending lethal aid weapons, including in recent days, tanks that basically didn't explicitly say we support sending Canadian tanks, but said Elizabeth May said we support Canadian commitments, which had just included tanks. And also online on Twitter, Tamara Lawrence, anti-war activist, she challenged Elizabeth May on Canada's weapons and militaristic policy vis-a-vis Russia. And she said that amidst that, she tagged Elizabeth May, and Elizabeth May responded by saying Canada's not at war with Russia, which I think is very much incorrect. And the evidence is significant. Intelligence, training, the weaponry, Canadian Special Forces on the ground, former Canadian soldiers, and other. The Globe, about a week ago, had a 2-page spread on a Canadian using a Canadian-made rifle that boasted that he killed 15. He killed 15 Russians around Bakhmut, or however you pronounce the name of the city that's under a lot of fighting right now. Bakhmut. He claims he killed 15 Russians on December 24th and 25th. And so also David Puglisi reported 4 or 5 days ago, the Ottawa Citizen military reporter, that the military, under its emergency wartime procurement policy, is spending $500 million on air defense, anti-tank missile, counter-drone for Canadian forces stationed in Latvia. So they're really, they're acting like the possibility of NATO, Canadian forces, of course, in Latvia on Russia's border. It's a further sign of the extent to which Canada is at war with Russia, that Elizabeth May is denying, explicitly denying. But I have to say, with Elizabeth May, unlike anyone in the NDP, she is actually swayable. So under all this pressure, also from a Green Party leader, Alex Terrell here in Quebec, Tamara Lawrence, Dimitri, other people within and around the party, under a lot of pressure about supporting the tank shipment, the donation, Canadian tank donation to Ukraine, she did 3-4 days ago in the House of Commons speak out and say that weapons will not end the war, and call for diplomacy, which I believe, not certain, but I believe is the first comment in the House of Commons since the, whatever it is now, $1.5 billion in Canadian weapon announcements or deliveries of weapons to Ukraine. So it's very much a one step back, one step forward. Says she supports the tanks, and then under pressure comes out and says weapons won't end the war. We need diplomacy. I think unfortunately, we got to take what we can get, and her statement in the House of Commons is a step forward that we should I guess applaud. Of course, unsurprisingly, the backlash came from all the usual suspects on Twitter, and then I just saw yesterday, I think it was, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress attacked her also. We'll see how Elizabeth May deals with all of that. The Washington Post on Thursday reported that the HIMARS missile system that the Americans gave to the Ukrainians, that the Ukrainians basically only fire it with the US giving coordinates. So this isn't just like we're giving the weapons and then they go use it. This is we, i.e. the US in this case, are telling them where to fire it to, right? If that's not at war, I don't know. Also, the Washington Post reported on Friday, I believe it was, that the Pentagon is pushing to restart a special operations program in Ukraine. So where American special forces were on the ground from 2018 until February 24th, where they're in Ukraine helping the Ukrainians on this sort of like propaganda disinformation front. And I guess there's elements of Congress that are pushing back because they understand that once you open, even if it's a relatively small mission, once you open this up, you get some, the Russians fire on some American special forces that are in Ukraine, and very quickly things can escalate. But it just shows you just how escalatory everything is. So it's mostly fairly slow moving, but all the steps are going in one direction. So again, Elizabeth May's comment in that context is helpful. Obviously, people have all seen the Nord Stream, the Seymour Hersh's conclusion that the Americans blew it up, which we of course knew before, but this is getting ourselves pretty close to the 100% confirmation on that. Shifting gears to Congo and the M23 rebels, the Rwandan-backed, coordinated, trained, armed. There's Rwandan soldiers, hundreds of Rwandan soldiers that are part of the M23. They are apparently on the cusp of potentially taking Goma, the major city in the east. That's I think about 700,000 people. It's like a major, maybe even as much as 1 million people. It's a major center. It's the major center, the only major center in all of eastern Congo. And already the M23's fighting has displaced more than 500,000 people. And if they were to take Goma, and apparently they're on the cusp of taking a town, that if they get the town, that effectively will cut Goma off. And that would almost certainly lead to hundreds of thousands of more people fleeing. Already there are tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people who are in makeshift camps in and around Goma, who have fled over the past year of this Rwandan-sponsored fighting. Now, I've talked about Canada's role in this. There are many facets to it. Some of it's quite interesting and controversial history. Some of it's just pretty basic current day stuff. So the current day stuff is Trudeau, he hobnobs with Paul Kagame, the brutal dictator of Rwanda that is ultimately responsible for much of this violence in Eastern Congo. And Canadian aid to Rwanda. They set up an embassy. Canada announced an embassy in June in Kigali to combat Russian influence in Africa. And at the time, Trudeau talked about, denounced in a conversation with Kagame, denounced foreign invasion, while of course Rwanda was sponsoring an invasion in Eastern Congo. Now, Rwanda and Kagame have terrorized the population of Eastern Congo for 30 years now, or close to 30 years, right? It's the level of violence is striking, and the neighbor being responsible for that violence is also really striking. So in '96, the Rwanda invaded Congo. They marched 1,500 kilometers to Kinshasa. They overthrew the Mobutu regime. And then when the person they put in power kicked Rwandan troops out of the country, They reinvaded in 1998. That led to a 8-country war for 5 years. Estimates are into the millions of people that died. And basically, since that time, their proxies have differing degrees of engagement have basically terrorized Eastern Congo. And the M23 is the sort of latest incarnation of there was a previous, Laurent Nkunda had led the mission for a number of years, and then about a decade ago, the M23 became the replacement Rwandan proxy force. So Canada's role in all this is and I know we've touched on it a little bit, but I want to get into a little bit more detail. One element specific. Two elements. One element of understanding Canada's complicity in this violence is at the ideological level. So Kagame justifies, and he continues right into today, incredibly, but he certainly initially in 96 and then in subsequent years, justifies it in part on the grounds that the génocidaires, the people who were responsible for the mass slaughter in spring of 1994 in Rwanda, that they fled to Eastern Congo. And there's no doubt that many people did flee Rwanda in 1994 to Eastern Congo, as they also did flee to Tanzania and flee to other countries in the region as well. But the biggest number did flee some fled to Uganda, a small amount. Biggest number did flee to Congo. But so Canada's contribution partly is at the ideological level. The principal individual responsible for what is popularly defined as the Rwandan genocide, the single individual that's most responsible is Paul Kagame. Okay, Paul Kagame is responsible in a number of ways. One, most obviously, is that the RPF, his force, shot down the plane that killed Habyarimana, the leader, and much of the military command, and a couple of ministers, as well as leader of Burundi. That event sparked the mass slaughter, primarily of Tutsi, but not only. And so Kagame blew the plane up, knowing that the country was a tinderbox, that there was a good chance that, sort of all kinds of horrors were unleashed by that. But more generally, Kagame is responsible because it was Kagame and the RPF that invaded Rwanda back in 1990 that led to the whole, multiple-year war to displace like 15-20% of the country between 1990 and 1994. Huge numbers of massacres carried out by the RPF, and so they were the aggressor. They basically what the RPF was in large part it was Tutsis who had fled to Uganda when the Tutsi monarchy was overthrown in between 1959 and 1961, and the majority, 90% majority Hutu took power with the overthrow of the Tutsi monarchy. And Kagame and the Tutsis that were in Uganda were part of the NRM, the National Resistance Movement, what becomes the government in Uganda. And Kagame is actually the head of intelligence for Yoweri Museveni, the NRM, and another top official of the RPF was a defense minister in the Ugandan government. So the official story is 4,000 soldiers in the Ugandan military of Rwandan descent, that they all fled, they all deserted and invaded Rwanda. In fact, of course, it was a Uganda RPF invasion of Rwanda. That's what's the act of aggression that provides a big chunk of the context for the horrors that then take place in spring of 1994. Canada has been right at the center in this highly simplistic account of the Rwandan genocide that Kagame has consistently used as his justification for invading Congo. Okay, so that, and I'm not going to get into all the details. Romeo Dallaire, Jerry Kaplan, there's a whole bunch of elements. It gets even tied into Canadian nationalist mythology. I've written about it in different places. I'm not going to get into all that. But so Canada's played an important role at the ideological level in upholding the what's helped justify right until today. Kagame still today, 30 years later, still claiming that they need to intervene in Rwanda or in Congo because the genocide ideology is around. So that's part of it. Now the other part, and this is just a totally bizarre story in Canadian foreign policy. It's only they were only able to pull this off in Africa, and the level of disinformation and misinformation and confusion and ignorance and not caring and whatever that goes along with that. When the refugee issue was heightening, was in the Rwandans who had fled to Eastern Congo in 1996, there was a real ramping up of discussion about this, about 1 million or so Rwandan refugees in Eastern Congo. And there was a whole push. The French pushed the UN Security Council resolution to deal with the issue of the refugees. At that point, the French government was viewed as sympathetic to Mobutu, who was, of course, the dictator in Kinshasa and Congo, while the UK, Canada, and the US were close to Kagame. And basically, Canada, so there's a UN Security Council resolution around these refugees in Eastern Congo, and the Americans don't want the French to oversee a UN mission to Eastern Congo because the French were not viewed as sympathetic to Kagame and the RPF. They were viewed as sort of conflictual. But Canada, with large number of French speakers, and Congo is a former French or a former Belgian colony, but French, French speaking as a colonial language at least, they wanted Canada to lead this mission. And so basically, the official story is that Chrétien's wife saw on CNN stories about the refugees in Eastern Congo, and he felt morally compelled to send this UN mission. Well, the UN mission never happens. It basically is like a fraudulent Canadian mission. They make a whole hype it up, big thing. They send some of the troops, but the mission never happens because the mission would have effectively undermined the RPF, Kigali, Rwanda's invasion into the Congo. And so it's just a totally like wild kind of story. It's like basically a fake Canadian UN mission to deal with a PR problem, but don't want to actually have troops on the ground because that would undermine what we effectively support, which is Rwanda and Uganda's invasion into the Congo, which then marches all the way to Kigali, overthrows the government, and Congo's never recovered. I mean, there are many Mobutu, very widely demonized in North American media, and correctly so, but many Congolese look on Mobutu in a positive light because the last 30 years of heavily Rwanda responsibility, undermining of their affairs has been so disastrous. So anyway, so a concrete Canadian, very odd, but concrete Canadian contribution to enable Rwanda's invasion in 1996 that has never completely ended. So that's a part. And just to end on this note of the violence going on in Eastern Congo today, which is terrible, is that Canada would need to put out like a fraction, I don't know what it is, 10% max of its contribution, diplomatic, military, whatever you want to call it, to Ukraine to end the violence. If the Canadian government was to, even if it was just to really hype up what's going on in Eastern Congo, blame Rwanda and say, we should isolate Kagame until he stops his killing in Congo, I think that would probably be enough. But certainly if you send 10% of the military spending, training, etc., that we've given to Ukraine to fight Russia, no doubt that would be enough to turn the tide militarily to stop the M23. And so if you were like serious about your rules-based international order, ending foreign invasions, if you could have a major consequence in upholding the international rules-based order, ending a foreign invasion at a tenth of the financial or military cost, you should certainly choose that one than the other one, if you were actually serious about what you said you were trying to do. Now, moving on to the final theme of this discussion is what in the world is going on with the balloons and the NORAD? I don't know. This is definitely a fascinating development. I see that they're all saying now today it's all Chinese. They're blowing up. The Chinese are just sending their balloons and other devices all around North America in a short period of time, and they've had to blow up 4 of them. This is apparently the first time that NORAD has done this in its history since officially it's 58 that NORAD's created. Is that someone's music?
Now, if you are faced with a real life situation, a nurse or a police officer or someone from the army actually came knocking on your door saying that they are going to stick a needle in you by force, then what do you do? You pull out your mobile phone?
There's a call-in user, Eve, who's not, oh no, they're muted. I think they're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't know if somebody's clearly trying to sabotage things tonight. But to the NORAD question, I thought I would just talk a little bit about NORAD. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I thought I'd talk a bit about NORAD and what seems to be going on here. I mean, the first thing that is definitely clear. The Lloyd Austin, Secretary, Defense Secretary in U.S., and Anita Anand were meeting 3 or 4 days ago before the last 3 blowing up. That they were meeting discussing NORAD, and they linked the initial Chinese balloon to NORAD, and use it as a way to boast about NORAD. And the Canadian government has talked about spending $40 billion on upgrading NORAD over the next 20 years, and they began some of that process, some of that funding 6 months ago or so. NORAD is kind of interesting to see some of the discussion that Trudeau said that it was a U.S. fighter jet that shot down one of these UFOs or whatever exactly they are. And a lot of people talked about this sort of the fact that it was the US doing it as if this was like a failure of the Canadian military system. But NORAD is a joint command that has a Canadian or US or Canadian fighter jets can be deployed by the command either way. And so there's about 1,000 Canadian Air Force that are part of NORAD now. That's down from at a height of 15,000. So NORAD was, even bigger part of Canadian military historically. Somebody's not muted. If somebody can, I'm not sure who that making that noise, but at the time, people talked about like the whole sovereignty question. This is coming up around NORAD. At the time when NORAD was being set up, this is what External Affairs said, and the military basically pushed NORAD, and External Affairs was ambivalent about it, worrying about the question of Canadian sovereignty. And they said the establishment of NORAD is a decision for which there is no precedent in Canadian history, in that it grants in peacetime to a foreign representative operational control of an element of Canadian forces in Canada. So a US general can deploy a Canadian fighter jet based in Canada. Similarly, NORAD a US commander can deploy missiles that are stationed in Canada. So from a standpoint of sovereignty, there's clearly NORAD's very obviously a big impingement on Canadian sovereignty. It's there's an interesting discussion about why the Canadian military is supportive of NORAD. I think they're supportive because it's a Canadian that's number 2 in charge, and they get to be actually in charge of the whole thing when the American commander is not there. But they get access to even the most advanced Air Force and other equipment, right? So the Canadian military likes it because they get to be part of the big boys, and they get to be part of the American empire and all of that goes with that. I think the more important part politically for us, or for people who are internationalists around NORAD, is the fact that NORAD is complicit in offensive wars. I mean, NORAD helps so much of Air Force and stuff comes from radars and satellites and stuff today that are under NORAD, that when the Americans go to war in Iraq, it's NORAD that is providing different forms of support for that. When bombing in Afghanistan, more recent stuff in Somalia, NORAD provides. So NORAD makes Canada complicit in most even wars that we're ostensibly not part of, makes Canada complicit in those. Also, NORAD's gone on high alert, and apparently it's on like stage 4 now. I think they announced that. I saw that today. It went on high alert during the Cuban Missile Crisis, even with with Diefenbaker, Canadian Prime Minister, not being aware, and same thing with the 1958 around Lebanon and Jordan, and in the Yom Kippur War, there was 73. So NORAD has, it ties Canada to the U.S. empire. The idea of it as a defensive arrangement, I mean, the U.S. has, close to 1,000 military bases around the world, has special forces, stationed all around the world. To be part of it, call any kind of a military alliance with that country defensive is very hard to take seriously. But what we're going to see in what we're seeing and going to keep seeing, I think, with this whole balloons or unidentified UFOs or whatever being shot down, is they're going to have a huge push to boost NORAD, a huge push push to boost the Canadian Air Force, and obviously you're ramping up the sort of fear mongering around China. So that's all I got for today. And if anyone has any comments or questions, go ahead. I'm only seeing Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
No, Yuri's before me, actually. Yuri,
Okay.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Eve, and sorry about all the disruptions tonight. You must have been pissing off quite a lot of people, Eve. Wow. Okay. 3 very quick questions, Eve. You can answer all of them, or you can, or 2, or however much you want. So the first question I want to ask is, you were talking about Congo, which is personal for me because my mom is from the Congo, and so I just want to ask, like, is the Congolese government just ever going to, like, say enough is enough? We have to, like, defend, like, our sovereignty and kick out the Rwandans. And when Paul Kagame is on his ridiculous self-pity lie tours with Romeo Dallaire, doesn't anyone ever, like, confront him about, okay, maybe what happens, does anyone ever confront him about what he does about what he's doing in Congo? And then I wanted to ask this question, which was, what's your thoughts on the very nasty debate that's been going on in the U.S. with the big rage against the war machine, which is mostly talking about ending the war in Ukraine, ending these endless cold wars with Russia and whatnot, and it sparked this debate on, do we ever make alliances with the right wing? And I understand completely where folks like Jacqueline Lucmon and Black Alliance for Peace, Black Agenda Report, and so forth, I understand completely where they and people who are involved in queer liberationist politics, why they object to sharing platforms with libertarians and people who complain nonstop about identity politics, wokeism, and so forth. But at the same time, and maybe this is because of my own personal experiences of mostly growing up in white communities and stuff like that, at the same time, like, I also find that, like, okay, you don't want to join this protest because of so-and-so, okay, by all means, don't join this protest. But at the same time, we have to advance the anti-war movement, and we have to advance the anti-imperialist movement. And if there's a Ron Paul and a bunch of other people that are going to be there who I might not agree with them under economic politics and stuff like that, if it's all about ending the war in Syria, ending the war in Ukraine, I do understand where David Swanson and other people say we need to make these alliances, but that's not minimizing the fact that there are some folks that do harbor transphobia, that do harbor racist points of views. But okay, we don't. Okay, we'll. Oh, anyways, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think that to respond to this, I guess I'll start with this and then the Congo question. I would, if I was in Washington D.C., I would go to the march.
Likewise,
I think the demands I support the demands. Would I, if I was in New York City, would I do I don't know how long, if it's a 2-hour drive or 3-hour drive, would I do the drive to get down there? I don't know about that. Would I get, heavily involved in the organizing? I don't, some other questions on that, right? I think that, it's, I'm totally troubled by people who seem to be spending, like, endless amount of time attacking it and, framing like they're, that just seems not politically acceptable. And I think that there's a lot of people who do that. They because they don't really care about taking on the war machine. Their politics are more domestic.
That being said, sorry to interject, but like I've just noticed some of, like, like the comments, like, again, I just want to make it very, 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 very clear to people that I'm not a libertarian. I don't support I don't support anyone and their stupid transphobic views. Not a TERF. Don't support all of these douchebags on both the left and the right who complain nonstop about endless wokeism and so forth like that. But if the main issue is about ending the war in Ukraine and stuff like that, I'm sorry, the libertarian movement, including when it came to Syria, is being much better compared to so many left-leaning groups that don't even want to protest a war that's a Western Gulf war that's going on in both those two countries. But they will get very, very angry about, Yemen and stuff like that. So that's just like my 2 cents about it. And that's not all to minimize at all.
No,
I
think it's important that people that is actually explicit. Is that okay? So I don't agree with. I mean, I don't follow U.S. politics well enough to know the politics of all these people. I know enough of Ron Paul to know that I don't agree with a whole lot of his politics. And,
likewise.
And so I think that needs to be stated explicitly. And like, there's a lot of people who attack antiwar.com. Okay, well,
yeah,
as I think antiwar.com is one of the best websites there is. I go to antiwar.com almost every single day. And so that doesn't mean that I agree with, like, Ron Paul. They publish Ron Paul's columns and whatever. I generally don't even bother reading them. Sometimes I do. Some of the columns are, I agree with and are I think, correct. So I don't know, like, I've been thinking about that around. I don't think I've, the big anti-war mobilizations here in Montreal, I don't really remember any like right-wing groups that were, part of it. So I haven't really been, I don't feel like, I was trying to think of an example where I may have been confronted with that kind of like, sort of alliance around on some specific issue when you really disagreed with people. And like, because it's not just a matter of like disagreeing, like, there was Échec à la Guerre had all these NGOs and a lot of them supported the coup in Haiti and stuff. So I guess they were, but at least ostensibly they were supposed to be sort of like progressive or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. But so it's a question of like how much energy one would put into it. And like I said, if I lived in DC, I would go because I think the demands are there. And I don't think that like I've been at demonstrations where, there's political parties that I don't agree with that are part of the demonstrations. Now, in this case, it's more organizers, and they have clearly gone out of their way to like announce speakers who I think have, with the maybe exception of this specific issue, are not just like not good on politics, but are actually quite bad on a bunch of issues. So that is a little bit of a different dynamic. But yeah, I think it's a bit tricky, and like part of it is that they're gonna attack any anti-war, any sort of mobilization that gets any sort of traction. And I don't even know if this actually does. This mobilization will get much traction, but it seemed to have been getting certainly a lot more traction than any other protest on kind of related issue. Yeah, so there's not a simple answer to that exactly, but yeah.
I mean, I'll just sorry to Laura and the other members, in the Zoom, but I'll just say this: there's a far right columnist, writes for the Mail on Sunday. His name is Peter Hitchens. I completely, don't agree with any of his like politics when it comes to social liberal stuff like abortion rights and stuff like that. But he is the only journalist that's speaking out against the war in Ukraine, who's constantly saying to people that we need to understand Russia's point of view and stuff like that. It's like, if I happen to be in Britain, he happens to be one of the speakers, okay, by all means, like, let him speak and I'll happily, like, privately, like, like slam his Christian conservative points of views. I would even do the same thing with this, but I just find that even when the left, when we want to try to like convert somebody to our cause, I just find it's much better. Okay, you go to this march and who knows? Maybe you might convert a libertarian or two to not just more anti-war causes, but to Marxist Leninism and so forth like that. But again, I also understand where people like Jacqueline Luqman and so forth are coming. But then that said, maybe. But then that said, okay, if you don't want to join this anti-war march, you want to organize your own. By all means, do it. But maybe we shouldn't spend so much time and energy denouncing folks that are trying to broaden the anti-imperialist movement.
There's a whole world out there of this whole business of lefties who say they're going after the red-brown alliance, who spend almost all their time just attacking people who are anti-war voices and saying it's because these voices, they attack me for antiwar.com publishing my articles. So it's what, right? And they're
same with Global Research, I assume, who I also don't.
They're trying to imply. I think they're trying to imply that you're actually a far right wing. You're actually far right, or I don't know. Exactly what they don't necessarily always come out directly and state what they're implying, that you're really a fascist. You're a fascist enabler. You're a neo-Nazi enabler and stuff like that. So, but effectively, what it comes down to is just don't engage in challenging Canadian foreign policy. That's ultimately what their perspective comes down to. Now, with regards to the Congo, I don't follow Congolese politics well enough. Patrick Mbeko, who used to be based here in Montreal, I don't think he is anymore. He's published a book on Canada's role in the Congo, a big long book. I used to follow him a lot on Facebook, and he commented a lot about the Congolese politicians and how much they're under the thumb of Rwanda and stuff like that. And so yeah, I think that is the case. I know that that's
the case that the current Congolese government is just too much under the thumb of the Western Rwanda.
They don't really want to go. They don't do what's necessary to kick Rwanda out of the country and to break, because Rwanda has a lot of backing from the US and Britain and stuff like that. So, but I don't know enough about the ins and outs of Congolese politics to Kabila, of course, that was the case, and then the elections and how that election process was kind of a whole how that played out. But I think that there are major Canadian companies, company like Banro that's been right there in Eastern Congo and totally complicit in all kinds of the different rebel factions and funding that. But go ahead, John. Or is Laura still there? I don't see her anymore. I don't know how this.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Would like your comments on the kind of the context of the Ukrainian war and the future. In the to me, it feels inevitable that the Russians are going to get their way, one way or another. What's your sense about given the pipeline blow up and its effect on Germany? Do you think there's any possibility that NATO will fall apart as a result? Particularly as the Americans seem to want to have the Europeans, specifically the Germans, export all their companies to the US. They seem to be wanting to attack the European economic infrastructure, with the results of the sanctions that seem to be backfiring on Europe more than on Russia. Anyway, your comment.
Well, I agree that the sanctions camp, the clear fail, NATO has failed at the level of the economic war with Russia. That that could change, but as much different European countries, and the IMF is now saying that, right, that Germany and Britain's economy Russia's economy is going to do better in 2023 than Germany and Britain. That's coming from the IMF now.
Yeah.
So now I'm not seeing the leap to the NATO falling apart. I mean, I would like to see that happen, but that's not what I don't think that's. I mean, it could happen, but it seems to me unlikely that Russia is gonna win in any sort of conclusive way. It's just Russia's just not shown itself to do, militarily it has not done well. And I think NATO has been bolstered by all this. So I wouldn't. I think that also got NATO expansion. I mean, I don't know where that's at with Finland and Turkey. Finland and Sweden and vis-a-vis Turkey, but yeah, no. So NATO's benefited from it. I do think that the big point of that Russia will win in a sense. Russia has more on the line than NATO does.
Sure.
Russian leadership sees this as, existential or something close to that. And so they will, keep going and keep going. But that's part of what makes all this so dangerous. Today the Secretary General of NATO was talking about how the Russian offensive has begun, and NATO's got to hurry up and get all its equipment to Ukraine. But I mean, this is the level of killing and destruction over such small pieces of territory. It's just such a horrible comment on humanity that this is going on.
A war that never had to happen.
Yeah. So, but how we're going to get out of this, I don't know. I'm not seeing. I mean, Elizabeth May's very, very modest comment is a positive development in the Canadian context, but we're seeing very little of any desire to push back in any major media outlet, in any political. I mean, are you seeing any unions put out statements? I'm not seeing hardly anything coming from almost anybody. And that's why, back to the Rage Against the War Machine protest, I think that's where those who are willing to get in bed with, to the extent that going to a demo is getting in bed with, but forces that they really object to, have a pretty good argument. Is just like, well, we need to do something. There needs to be some pushback against this craziness. And but yeah, there are protests planned here. I know in Montreal, I think it's on the 25th. It's the weekend after. And so on the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, I think there are protests and different actions planned across the country that people should pay attention to and go to if they can. Is there any other comments? Does Laura still have a?
I think we lost Laura, but actually, but then very quickly, Eve, I'm very curious. I think both me and Laura and other people asked you, like, would anyone on the Canadian left ever organize like some kind of an anti-NATO demonstration with the Canadian Libertarian Party, or are people?
Or I think the more concrete example would probably be like Maxime Bernier's party, the more realistic kind of, I don't know. And that's an interesting question. Maxime Bernier, I tweeted that a couple of times. That's, on the same day or, within 24 hours, Jagmeet Singh's comment on Ukraine, and then Maxime Bernier's comment. And Maxime Bernier's comment was far, far, far better than Jagmeet Singh's comment. And Bernier, if I remember correctly, what I've seen a few of his tweets, they're good. I mean, Maxime Bernier was, of course, Stephen Harper's foreign minister, and so let's not pretend that this guy is somebody who who played a role in determining bad policy. That right. So it's not just at an ideological level. He was actually an administrator of imperialistic Canadian foreign policy, but at least rhetorically, on some of the stuff with Russia, he's he's a lot better than the NDP or even Elizabeth May.
It's funny because, like, in France, I mean, the few times I do follow French politics, I can't all the time because of language barriers and stuff like that. But if you actually look at like some interviews of Marine Le Pen, the ones in which there are English subtitles for like that, I mean, she's like really anti like imperialist. Like she wants like peace with like Russia. She speaks out against like France, like supporting like Islamist death squads and like Syria and stuff like that. Talks about how how NATO supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and she actually sounds way more like an anti-imperialist compared to anyone in of the French Socialist Party and stuff like that. And again, I also I just want to make myself clear that when Tulsi Gabbard speaks out on the war in Syria or talks between détente in Russia and China, I'll applaud her on that, but I'll still damn her to death for complaining about wokeism and that the Democratic Party under effing Joe Biden is too anti-white and stuff like that. And I still think, again, when it comes to this whole rage against the war machine, which is specifically talking about Ukraine, look, if people don't want to join, by all means, don't join. But at the same time, we also have to think about trying to convert people into our way of thinking. But the fact that but there is a problem when it comes to class reductionism, and there is a problem between mostly white, Marxist, cisgender left people who minimize the plight of Black people, trans people, Indigenous people, and whatnot, which also does need to be. It's a conversation that doesn't need to be had. But when it comes to this specific thing, that's an issue for another day. You want to end the war in Ukraine, by all means, hold your nose and and go to this rally, or don't go to this rally, but organize another rally, but just don't make a huge hoopla over it, which I don't know. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Emily, did you have a comment, a question?
Yeah, just a quick FYI. The Association of United Ukrainian Canadians, which is historically the left communist / socialist cult community that I grew up in Ottawa, by the way, but they recently issued a statement that I would see was on the websites of what have become Association of United Ukrainian Canadians cultural centers now. But they issued a statement on essentially saying, we hope for peace in Ukraine, and we hope, I don't remember the wording, but essentially the message was, we hope Russia smartens up and stops causing problems. So that broke my heart in a million pieces, as it does every day. But yeah, unfortunately, I think some of the points that you were making, Yuri, to me, what underlies it is that in so many movements we've lost. It's more, we have to be more than anti-imperialist. We have to have an economic analysis. And I think that's been lost in anti-racist movement, and certainly in the women's movement, in the environmental movement. So anyway, I'll let it go there. Otherwise, I'll go on for an hour. But I just wanted to mention that about the AUC. I was shocked at their neutral stance on it. So.
By the way, Europe, it's even worse. Europe, there's no peace movement. It's almost of non-existent. Most of the pathetic excuse of the left is all stand with Ukraine, despite neo-Nazis. We want war with China, and we're environmentalists, but we support fighter jets.
Yeah, I know. I just resigned from the Green Party of Canada. But anyway. But yes, thank you so much for today's presentation. This is
thanks. Did you have some final comment, John, or question? Otherwise,
yeah, I just wondered. Yeah, I'm sorry. Another big geopolitical question here, but my sense is that there's a certain desperation in the empire to do in their major competitors, which is Russia and China, and a big factor in that, which you never hear in the press very much, is the fact that the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road project that China has been rolling out for the last 20 years, is being a huge success in the Eurasian continent. And it's going back partially to, and a significant part of that, the largest economic project in history, that Europe is a fundamental component of that from the Chinese point of view, because that's the end of the Silk Road. And so it must really freak out, for want of a better word or expression, the US, because that's a direct threat to NATO and a direct threat to the Atlanticist position, right? And that's coupled with Putin in the last couple of months saying in a major speech that Russia is done with Europe, that they've tried always to Sunday to integrate and align with Europe and being continually rebuffed. And quite recently, I understand that they have disengaged from like about 20, not contracts, but agreements, with the Europeans in terms of trying to work with them. So are you aware of that? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, well, I think there's no doubt that China, the US is freaking out about the balloon thing we're hearing about, and NORAD blowing up balloons is because China's economy is getting close or equal to the size of the US economy. And China, is taking its rightful place as, as the most populous nation in the world. It should be the most powerful nation in the world, right? And that freaks out the people who run the US empire. So there's no doubt about that. It's not about authoritarianism or this or that, or but I don't fully understand when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, and China question. That doesn't make complete sense to me, because one of the things that this is doing, of course, is making the relations between China and Russia stronger. So yes, ostensibly from an American perspective, they want to weaken China. You don't want this country that has massive levels of natural resources to have, to deepen that alliance.
That's right.
So from that standpoint, the Americans should not want to get into this conflict with Russia. And that's what John Mersheimer's perspective, that's a part of his reason for being speaking out on Ukraine, is because he thinks that the US should spend more of its time focusing on China. And the RAND Corporation just published a thing a couple of weeks ago, kind of making that point. They were very hawkish going back to 2019, hawkish on let's go at China or go at Russia and this and that. Now they're saying that basically keeping this war going is just going to take away from challenging China. And so that makes sense to me. So that doesn't make sense to me from the standpoint of the US campaign against China, why they would do the NATO proxy war. But concurrent to that is part of what you were saying, I think, which is that what this has all done is it's subordinated Germany and much of Western Europe, NATO countries, to US policy and made them less inclined to work with China. It's sort of drawn lines, and I think Taiwan is going to be where that's going to potentially play out in a military way. And so what you're by the NATO proxy war with Russia, you're driving those NATO countries, with Germany has huge economic relations with China, you're driving them into a more ambivalent, questioning kind of relations with China, which even if you end up driving Russia closer to China, if you can drive Germany, Italy, Poland, etc., France away from China, maybe that is ultimately worth it in your big, macro battle that is clearly coming and we're playing out with China. So, but I'm not really sure. I haven't read an analysis of those questions that I found particularly convincing on that. But anyone else? But we're past there. It's past 7, quite a bit past 7. So maybe it's a question to keep take up in future sessions. And if people have do see articles about that subject, I'm very curious to see what people are thinking. But thanks everyone. Same time, same place next week. Take care.
Steve, thanks very much. Bye-bye,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night.